Short story by Paul McCann entitled The Vineyard. Once there lived a king called Francis. He was kind and ruled fairly over the kingdom he owned. The king lived in a castle upon a mountain that overlooked a lake. King Francis loved his people dearly and protected them with a powerful army of thousands. The people of Firelake were happy and felt secure in his kingdom. Many people had heard about this kind king and had left their kingdoms for his. All were happy with his reign and remained there under his authority. The entire kingdom was without borders and freely stretched around a place known as Firelake. The people of Firelake had heard stories about the mountain that breathed smoke, but as yet none had witnessed its anger until the day the king fell sick. It was then the earth shook, and high above the lake the smouldering mountain erupted. Fire and smoke spat from the open volcano's mouth like flaming forked tongues from Hades' pit. The king was very weak, but called the leaders together and issued the command to leave the kingdom immediately, and those who wanted to remain with him were welcome to do so, and those who wanted to go their own way would not be hindered. As the entire people in the kingdom moved, few went their own way, and within a week the king and his people had left the kingdom empty and barren. And from a distance they looked on in horror as the flowing stream of boiling hot lava gushed down the mountainside towards the lake, destroying everything in its path. And this episode was left far behind as King Francis recovered from the sickness that had come over him. And so he took his followers on a long journey through a dry wilderness and then into a dark, dense forest until they reached a limestone tableland with gentle green valleys and clear springs. This fertile land was cradled by a mountain that seemed to glisten under the sun and the moon. The mountain was majestic, even mysterious in all its magnificence. So it was here the nomadic lake dwellers found sanctuary, nestled by a mountain that seemed to touch the clouds. Francis of Firelake blessed this place and set half of his army the task of building a new kingdom, while the remainder had begun to cut roads and erect up tents. Francis had named this place White Mountain, and he claimed it as his new kingdom where he would rule and protect the people who dwelled there within and under his authority. At first, things went smoothly. Then various attacks came from the armies of surrounding countries. Never once did any threat trouble the king, for his army was large and strong, and its sovereign power had enabled him and the army to conquer and quell whatever resistance stood in the path of the king. Consequently, the army of King Francis were feared, and they grew in strength and number. The leaders respected their king, and in return Francis rewarded them with land and a share in the governing in the provinces around the White Mountain. And as keeper of the mountain and master over the voids that stretched between valley and sea, Francis decided to introduce winemaking to the region called the Acrossa. It was here where a rich limestone deposit lay, and was ideal for the purpose Francis had in mind. Vineyards began to appear around the Acrossa, and the people reaped great wealth from the grape harvests. The king's winemakers were kept busy, while the workers in the vineyards had to employ extra people to keep up with the demand. As the reputation spread about the wine, many people came to White Mountain, and the king decided that his people needed more land. The kingdom began to extend further, and it came to the king that he should seek out new territories. So, with half of his army, he left the kingdom in search of the countryside beyond White Mountain. In the absence of the king, corruption crept into the vineyards in the shape of jealousy and greed. It was thought that in the king's absence, double the harvest would be reaped by hiring extra workers and paying them very little for their labour. Then the harvest would be divided in half, with the king still receiving his usual amount. So the seeds of greed were sowed, and the workers hired under such harsh treatment that a bumper harvest was gathered. And when the workers asked for their wages, they were told that they would have to pay tax as well as money for their accommodation and food. This left nothing for the workers but blisters and sore backs for their hard work. When the workers protested, their employers slaughtered every one of them, and they were buried in the very vineyards where they had toiled. The winemakers went to work and were eager to cask the vintage in a hurry, just in case the king returned before the vintage had been cased. And so the crop was put away into the cellars of the king, while the winemakers had sold their half of the harvest to the neighbouring country. And the next season had come, and more workers had to be hired. The king returned on a surprise visit and witnessed how the workers were being treated, but silenced his tongue. And after he checked the previous vintage, he ordered a sample of the wine. It was a bitter, sour taste, the worst he had ever tasted. He thought there was some problem with the soil, and so the king asked his soldiers to dig up all the earth in the vineyards to see what the problem was. It was a big shock for the king when the soldiers discovered beneath the soil were hundreds of corpses. The remains of men, women, and children were found. One by one, each body was brought up and presented before the king. The winemakers at first denied any knowledge about this terrible discovery. But when the king from the neighbouring country arrived, demanding his money back for the sour wine, the truth was revealed. In return for their wickedness, the king set his winemakers to work in the vineyards built for the unhappy customers. And after a good year, the winemakers barreled up a crop of excellent wine for their friendly neighbours. After the debt was paid in full, the king told his soldiers to execute all his winemakers and bury them where their victims had been found. And to this king all neighbouring tribes came, and to this king all other kings came. His kingdom spread, and his reputation along with it. His vineyards supplied bountiful harvests, and the wine was sweet to the taste. The end.